It was a bright Sunday morning in mid-May, the kind of day that felt full of possibilities. From the kitchen window, Nina Carter could see her family gathered on the driveway. The sound of excited laughter floated through the air as her younger sister, Mia, spun in circles beside a brand-new white Tesla. An enormous red bow sat on the roof, glinting in the sunlight. Her parents, Angela and Robert, stood close by, their faces glowing with pride as they handed Mia the keys. It was a graduation gift, a celebration of Mia's hard work, they said. But from where Nina stood, it was just another reminder of how little her achievements seemed to matter. She held a steaming mug of coffee, its warmth doing little to ease the cold pit in her stomach. Her reflection in the kitchen window stared back at her, tired and unremarkable. The counter beside her was cluttered with a stack of scratch-off lottery tickets, the modest gifts she had managed to buy for her family. She'd spent the last few months scraping together every penny, saving for culinary school applications. The tickets were all she could afford, but no one had even bothered to open them yet. "Oh my God! I can't believe it!" Mia's voice rang out as she slid into the driver's seat of the Tesla, running her hands over the steering wheel like it was a rare treasure. Nina's chest tightened. Her parents clapped and laughed, snapping photos, their attention entirely on Mia. It wasn't that Nina begrudged her sister's happiness. Mia was sweet in her own way. But moments like these made Nina feel like she was always standing on the sidelines of her own family's story. "Nina." Her mother's voice startled her. Angela had stepped inside, still wearing her light cardigan. "Why aren't you out there with us? Come see your sister's car." "I'm just finishing my coffee, Mom," Nina replied, forcing a polite smile. Angela frowned, that familiar look of disappointment crossing her face. "You could try being happy for her, you know. This is a big moment." "Right," Nina muttered under her breath, "because I always make everything about myself." Angela's eyes narrowed. "Don't start," she warned. "Not today." As her mother walked back outside, Nina exhaled slowly, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Through the window, she saw her father showing Mia how to adjust the mirrors. He looked proud, prouder than he'd ever been of Nina. Not when she made the honor roll, not when she won a regional cooking competition, and certainly not when she got into culinary school. Their refusal to help with tuition had been the final nail in the coffin of her hopes for their support. Absent-mindedly, Nina picked up one of the lottery tickets and began scratching off the numbers. She wasn't even paying attention until something caught her eye. 3 matching symbols gleamed up at her from the small card. Her heart pounded as she double-checked the winning combinations. The prize amount made her freeze. $50,000. Her hands shook as she stared at the ticket. $50,000. It wasn't enough to change her life completely, but it was enough for culinary school. Enough to start building her dream of opening a restaurant. Enough to prove to everyone, her parents, herself, that her hobby was worth something. But then she hesitated. This ticket had been meant as a gift. The right thing to do would be to hand it over to her parents, let them decide what to do with it. Maybe they'd use it for Mia's college fund or a family trip she wouldn't be invited on. She glanced out the window again. They were still laughing, completely unaware of her absence. The choice felt impossible, but in the end, Nina's decision was clear. Carefully, she folded the ticket and slipped it into her pocket. The remaining scratch-offs she gathered and dropped into the recycling bin. No one would miss what they hadn't bothered to open. "Nina." Robert's voice boomed from the driveway. "Come take a family photo." She paused with her hand on the doorknob, looking out at them one more time. Her parents, Mia, the car, they looked like the perfect family. Complete. Without her. "Coming," she called back, but instead of stepping outside, Nina headed upstairs. She pulled out her laptop and opened a new tab, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched for apartment listings. The ticket felt heavy in her pocket, but for the first time in years, Nina felt light, like she was finally stepping towards something that belonged to her. The key felt cold and unfamiliar in Nina Carter's hand as she unlocked the door to her new apartment. It was a tiny studio, perched above a bustling Mexican fusion restaurant in downtown New York. The space wasn't much, Just a bed in the corner, a small kitchenette, and a single window overlooking the busy street below. But it was hers. For the first time, Nina felt a sense of control over her life, however modest it was. The smell of garlic, lime, and roasting chiles wafted up through the floorboards from the restaurant downstairs. It made her stomach growl, but it also reminded her why she had made this leap. She had already deposited the lottery winnings into a bank account, carefully budgeting for her culinary school tuition and this apartment's security deposit. The rest, she told herself, would go toward her dream of one day owning a restaurant. As she set down the duffel bag containing her few belongings, her phone buzzed loudly from her pocket. She ignored it at first, unpacking her essentials: a knife roll, a well-worn cast-iron skillet, and a handful of cookbooks that had inspired her since childhood. But the persistent vibrations finally drew her attention. She sighed, pulling out her phone. A string of missed calls from Mom and Dad glared back at her. The most recent voicemail from her father made her hesitate before pressing play. "Nina," his voice began, gruff with irritation. "Your mother's upset and Mia's struggling at school. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Time to grow up and come home." She deleted the message, without a second thought. Her family's pattern was all too predictable, ignoring her until they needed something, then laying on guilt when she didn't fall in line. Nina had spent her whole life catering to their expectations, and where had it gotten her? Overlooked, underappreciated, and dismissed as the selfish one. A knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, she saw a tall man in a chef's coat, his salt and pepper hair pulled back into a short ponytail. The embroidered name on his jacket read, Hector Diaz. "Hello, new tenant," he called through the door, his voice warm and heavily accented. "I'm Hector. I own the restaurant downstairs." Nina opened the door cautiously. "Hi, I'm Nina," she said, her voice tentative. "I thought I saw someone moving in," Hector said, gesturing to the boxes stacked by the door. "I wanted to introduce myself. We try to keep a family atmosphere here." The word family made Nina wince, but there was something disarming about his smile. His eyes wandered to the knife roll on the table behind her. "You cook?" he asked, tilting his head. "I try to," Nina replied, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm starting culinary school next month." Hector's face lit up. "No kidding? We could use someone who knows their way around a kitchen. Just part-time if you're interested." Before Nina could respond, her phone buzzed again, her father's name lighting up the screen. Her frustration must have shown on her face because Hector gave her a knowing look. "Complicated situation?" "You could say that," Nina muttered, silencing the call. Hector nodded thoughtfully. "Let me give you some advice, Nina. When life feels overwhelming, the best thing you can do is keep your hands busy and your knives sharp. Come down tomorrow morning if you're interested." He left without waiting for an answer, leaving Nina alone with her thoughts. She stared at her phone, then at the cluttered counter where her dreams of culinary school and independence had started to take shape. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't constantly second-guessing herself or seeking her parents' approval. The next morning, Nina found herself in Hector's kitchen, tying on an apron and nervously chopping onions. The rhythmic motion of the blade against the cutting board felt soothing, almost meditative. Hector worked beside her, occasionally glancing over to offer tips on her technique. "You've got good instincts," he said, watching her adjust the heat under a simmering sauce. "But I can tell you're angry. Is that a bad thing?" Nina asked, surprised by his observation. Hector shrugged. "Depends. Anger can fuel passion, or it can burn everything down. The difference is in control." His words stuck with her. As she diced, sautéed, and plated, she began to feel a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe this tiny kitchen above a noisy street could be the place where she started to prove, to herself and everyone else, that her dreams were worth fighting for. But the calls and texts from her family didn't stop. "You're being selfish, Nina," one text from her mother read. "Mia needs you. Come home." Each message was like a needle, pricking the edges of her resolve. Still, she didn't reply. She knew they didn't really want her. They wanted the version of her that stayed small, quiet and manageable. Hector's words came back to her as she prepared a batch of enchiladas that afternoon. Anger can fuel passion or destroy it. The difference is in control. Nina gripped the handle of the skillet tighter. She wasn't running away from her family anymore. She was running toward something better. Nina Carter's days in Hector Diaz's kitchen began early and ended late. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity, pans sizzling, knives clattering, and the warm, earthy aroma of Mexican spices filling the air. At first, she kept her head down, focused on chopping, peeling, and plating, but gradually, her confidence began to grow. Hector's calm yet firm guidance shaped her skills, and she started to feel like she belonged. "Nina," Hector said one morning, watching her deftly prepare a batch of salsa verde, "you've got the hands of a chef. But cooking isn't just about technique. It's about heart, too. Do you believe in what you're making?" Nina hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels like I'm just trying to prove I can do it." Hector nodded, tasting the salsa with a wooden spoon. "That's your anger talking. Anger's not a bad thing. It can push you forward, but you can't let it take the wheel. Passion with control, Nina. That's what separates a good chef from a great one." His words stayed with her. Nina began to see how her frustration with her family had driven her to this moment, but she also realized it couldn't be her only fuel. As she plated enchiladas for the lunch rush, she thought about how the food on the plate wasn't just a meal, it was a story. Maybe it was time for her story to be about more than just running away. Weeks turned into months, and Nina's confidence grew with every shift in the kitchen. She learned how to balance the bold flavors of Hector's menu, how to work the line under pressure, and, most importantly, how to find joy in the process. The restaurant became her sanctuary, a place where her hands were always busy and her thoughts, for the first time, felt calm. But her past wasn't ready to let her go so easily. One afternoon, as the lunch rush was winding down, Hector stepped into the kitchen, a strange look on his face. "Nina," he said, his voice unusually soft, "there are 2 women out front asking for you. They said they're your family." Nina froze, her heart pounding. She didn't have to ask who they were. She wiped her hands on her apron, steadying herself, and walked out to the dining room. There, at a corner table, sat her mother, Angela, her posture as rigid as ever, and her younger sister, Mia, fidgeting awkwardly with the menu. "Nina," Angela said as soon as she saw her voice carrying that familiar tone of disapproval. "We've been calling you for weeks. Why haven't you answered?" Nina crossed her arms, keeping her voice even. "I needed space, Mom. And I'm busy." Angela's eyes swept over the restaurant, her gaze landing on the open kitchen behind Nina. "Busy? Is this what you've been doing? Working in some hole-in-the-wall place?" "It's not a hole in the wall," Nina shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's Hector's restaurant, and I'm learning more here than I ever did at home." Mia, who had been silent until now, looked up. "Nina, we just want to make sure you're okay." Nina softened slightly at her sister's words, but didn't let her guard down completely. "I'm fine, Mia. Better than fine, actually." Angela sighed, her expression turning from stern to weary. "This isn't what we wanted for you, Nina. You had so much potential." "Potential?" Nina interrupted, her frustration boiling over. "You mean the potential to follow the path you chose for me? To become someone I'm not?" Mia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Angela leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Nina, this isn't about us. It's about you running away and making a spectacle of yourself." "A spectacle?" Nina laughed bitterly. "You mean finally doing something for myself?" The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Mia broke the silence. "Mom, stop," she said quietly. "You're not helping." Angela looked at her youngest daughter in surprise, but Mia wasn't finished. "Nina's not running away. She's figuring things out, and maybe that's okay." Nina blinked, taken aback by her sister's words. Mia had always been the golden child, the one who never questioned their parents. Hearing her speak up now felt like a small victory. Angela stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine," she said stiffly. If this is the life you want, so be it. But don't expect us to clean up your messes. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Mia behind. For a moment, Mia looked torn, her eyes flicking between Nina and the door. Then she sighed and stood up. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean for things to get so heated. I just thought we could talk." Nina nodded, her anger ebbing. "Maybe someday, Mia. But not today." As Mia left, Nina felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She turned back toward the kitchen, where Hector was waiting, his arms crossed and a knowing look on his face. "You okay?" he asked. Nina shrugged. "I don't know." Hector smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're human. Now, get back to work. Those enchiladas aren't going to plate themselves." Nina laughed despite herself and returned to the stove. The confrontation with her family still weighed on her, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't the one being pushed around. She was standing her ground, one dish at a time. It was late when Nina Carter heard the knock on the back door of Hector's restaurant. The kitchen was quiet, the dinner rushed long over, and the hum of the industrial refrigerator was the only sound. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened the door to find Mia standing there, clutching her phone and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually polished appearance was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red and swollen. "Mia?" Nina asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Mia stepped inside, hugging her arms tightly. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you." Nina hesitated, then gestured for her to sit at the small prep table. Hector had left hours ago, so it was just the two of them. Mia sank into a chair, staring at her hands. "I'm failing 2 of my classes," she blurted out. "And I don't even know how to tell Mom and Dad." Nina sat across from her, trying to process what she'd just heard. "But aren't you applying to law schools? Isn't that what all the fuss has been about?" Mia let out a bitter laugh. "That's what Mom and Dad want. It's their dream, not mine. I don't even like law. I never have." She looked up at Nina, her eyes filled with desperation. "How do you do it? How do you just walk away from everything they expect of you?" Nina leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "But staying wasn't an option either. I couldn't keep living a life that wasn't mine. It hurt at first, but I'm finally figuring out who I am." Mia nodded slowly, her expression a mix of sadness and relief. "I wish I could be that brave," she said. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photo gallery. "I've been doing this instead of studying," she said, handing the phone to Nina. Nina scrolled through the images and felt her breath catch. The photos were stunning, close-ups of food plated beautifully, with soft lighting and creative angles. Each picture captured the essence of the dish, making it look like art. "These are amazing," Nina said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Mia, you have a gift." Mia looked down, her cheeks flushing. "It's just a hobby," she mumbled. "No," Nina said firmly, placing the phone on the table. "This is more than a hobby. You're talented. Have you shown these to anyone?" Mia shook her head. "I can't. Mom and Dad would freak out if they knew I was spending my time on this instead of focusing on my real career." For a moment, Nina saw herself in her sister, someone trapped under the weight of their parents' expectations. She reached across the table and placed a hand on Mia's. "You don't have to tell them yet," she said. "But you should keep doing this. If you love it, don't let it go." Mia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks, Nina." The moment was interrupted by the sound of Nina's phone buzzing on the counter. She stood up to check it, expecting another message from her mother. Instead, she saw a text from an unknown number. When she opened it, her stomach dropped. It was a screenshot of an email, a formal complaint about Nina's finances and her questionable use of funds. The sender was listed as Angela Carter, their mother. Mia noticed Nina's expression and frowned. "What's wrong?" Nina handed her the phone, her hands shaking. Mia scanned the message, her face darkening. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Mom's been asking questions about you." She's talked to people in town, trying to figure out how you're paying for culinary school and this apartment. Of course she is, Nina said bitterly, pacing the small kitchen. She can't just let me live my life. That's not all, Mia added, her voice hesitant. She's been meeting with Emily Harper. You know, your old friend? The one from high school's. Nina froze. Emily had been her closest friend in their cooking club, but after graduation, things had soured. Emily's family had money, connections, and influence, and she used all of it to leapfrog her way into the city's culinary elite. Now, Emily was a rising star chef known for her cutthroat tactics. Why would Mom be meeting with Emily? Nina asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Mia hesitated, then said, I overheard them talking at the country club. Emily's planning some big pop-up event, and Mom is helping her, well, sabotage you. She thinks she's doing it to save you. Nina's anger flared. Save me? By ruining everything I've worked for. I know, Mia said quickly. I thought it was insane too. That's why I came to you. I couldn't keep this to myself. Nina leaned against the counter, her mind racing. Emily was ruthless, and if her mother was backing her, this could ruin Nina's chances at building her reputation. But then she looked at Mia, who had come to her despite knowing it would upset their parents. It was a small crack in the family dynamic, but it was enough for Nina to see that not everything was hopeless. Thanks for telling me, Nina said finally.
And Mia?
You're braver than you think. Mia smiled faintly. So, what are you going to do? Nina straightened up, her jaw set. I'm not going to let them win. If Emily and Mom think they can stop me, they've got another thing coming. Mia's smile widened, and for the first time in years, Nina felt like she had an ally in her corner. It started with a casual scroll through social media, a quick break between Nina's grueling prep sessions for the pop-up event. She was sitting in Hector's kitchen, sipping coffee as the morning light poured through the window. The screen of her phone suddenly froze her mid-sip, a beautifully plated dish that looked eerily familiar. It was her dish, her signature creation, one she had spent months perfecting. The caption on the post read, "Excited to debut this at our upcoming showcase. Innovation meets tradition." The account? Amelia Harper's. Nina's stomach churned with anger and disbelief. Amelia had taken her dish, right down to the plating and garnish, and claimed it as her own. She's been watching me, Nina muttered, her voice trembling. Someone's been feeding her information. Tessa, who had been photographing dishes in the corner, walked over, concern etched on her face. It gets worse, she said, holding up her own phone. She swiped to another post from Amelia's account. Photos from a private investor meeting. In one of the pictures, blurred in the background but unmistakable, sat their mother, Angela Carter, deep in conversation with the group. Nina's hands clenched into fists. She's working with Mom, she said through gritted teeth. What's she telling them? Tessa hesitated, biting her lip. I overheard her talking yesterday. Mom's been spreading rumors about your finances, the lottery ticket, even that you're unstable. She's trying to scare investors away from supporting you. The words hit Nina like a punch to the gut. Her own mother, actively working to undermine her. She wanted to scream, to throw something, but Hector's voice echoed in her mind. Passion with control, Nina. That's the key. As if on cue, Hector walked into the kitchen, holding a clipboard. Nina, he said, his usual calm demeanor replaced with concern. We've got a problem. The health inspector called. They're coming in for a surprise inspection this afternoon.
Nina's heart sank. What? Why?
We've never had any issues. Hector set the clipboard on the counter. Someone filed multiple complaints about our kitchen. Faulty equipment, expired ingredients, unsafe practices. It's all bogus, but it's going to disrupt your prep time for the event. Nina didn't need to ask who was behind it. Amelia was playing dirty, and with her mother's backing, she had all the tools to destroy Nina's chances at success. For a moment, Nina felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. Amelia had stolen her dish, her mother was sabotaging her reputation, and now the pop-up event was at risk. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. I can't do this, she whispered, sitting down at the prep table. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm in over my head. No, Tessa said firmly, placing a hand on her sister's shoulder. That's exactly what they want you to think. But you've worked too hard to let them win. Tessa opened her camera roll and scrolled to the photos she had taken of Nina's late-night cooking experiments. Look at these, she said, holding up the phone. The images were stunning, vivid shots of Nina's dishes in various stages of preparation, each one more creative and innovative than the last. This is who you are, Nina. Not their lies. Not their sabotage. Hector nodded, picking up a chef's knife and testing its edge, a ritual he always performed when making a point. You know what separates a good chef from a great one? He asked, his voice steady. Not talent. Not creativity. It's what they do when everything goes wrong. Now, are you going to let them ruin you, or are you going to show them what you're made of? Nina looked at the knife in Hector's hand, then back at Tessa, who was watching her with quiet determination. She thought about the months she had spent rebuilding her life, the late nights in Hector's kitchen, the sacrifices she had made to get here. Her anger burned hot, but it didn't feel out of control. It felt focused. Let's make something better, Nina said, standing up. Her voice was steady now, her resolve solid. If Amelia wants to copy me, fine. Let her. She can't steal what makes my cooking mine. Tessa grinned. What's the plan? Nina glanced at Hector. Remember that fusion dish we talked about? The one that combines mole with modern plating techniques. Hector's eyes lit up. The one you said was too risky? Exactly, Nina said, her confidence returning. Amelia plays it safe. Let's give the investors something they've never seen before. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Nina worked with a precision she hadn't known she possessed, crafting a dish that told her story, not just as a chef, but as someone who had fought for every bit of success. Tessa documented the process, capturing each step with her camera. By the time the health inspector arrived, Nina was ready. The kitchen passed the inspection with flying colors, and Nina's dishes were prepped and plated for the pop-up event. But she knew the real battle was yet to come. Amelia and her mother had done everything they could to derail her, but Nina wasn't going down without a fight. She looked at her finished dish, a modern twist on mole, with bold flavors and artistic presentation. It was more than food, it was a declaration. This was her voice, her identity, her defiance. Tessa snapped a final photo. Ready? She asked. Nina nodded. Let's do this. Nina sat at the stainless steel prep table in Hector's kitchen, staring at the empty plate in front of her. The weight of everything, Amelia's betrayal, her mother's sabotage, and the looming pop-up event, pressed down on her like a heavy fog. The excitement she had once felt about the event had been replaced with doubt and fear. What if they were right? What if she wasn't good enough? Hector entered the room, wiping his hands on a towel. He didn't say anything at first, just grabbed a knife and tested its edge, his quiet ritual whenever the stakes were high. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. You can't fight shadows, Nina, he said, placing the knife down. You have to face them head-on. Otherwise, they'll follow you forever. Nina looked up at him, her frustration spilling over. Amelia stole my dish. My mother is actively trying to ruin me. I don't know how to win against this. You don't need to win their game, Hector replied, pulling out a chair to sit across from her. You need to make your own. Show them who you are, not who they want you to be. Nina frowned, unsure what he meant. Hector gestured toward the shelf where her cookbooks sat, each one filled with recipes she'd studied religiously. Those are great for learning, he said. But now, it's time for you to create something new, something that's entirely yours. His words hit her like a bolt of clarity. She thought about the countless times she'd tried to live up to someone else's expectations, her parents, her instructors, even Hector at times. But the truth was, she had her own voice, her own story, and it was time to tell it. What if I reinvent my mom's old recipe? She said aloud, the idea taking shape as she spoke. It's familiar, it's traditional, but I could turn it into something bold. Something no one expects. Hector's face broke into a slow smile. Now you're cooking, he said. The best dishes come from hunger, Nina, not just for food, but for something deeper. Her mind raced as she jotted down ideas, sketching out the reimagined dish. The recipe she'd grown up with, a classic mole served over roasted chicken, would be transformed into something modern and daring. Layers of flavor, textures that surprised, and plating that told her story of breaking free from tradition while still honoring it. Tessa, Nina called, snapping her sister out of her corner, where she'd been editing photos. I need your help. Tessa walked over, camera in hand. What's up? I'm going to create something completely new, Nina said, her voice gaining confidence. And I need you to capture every step. We're going to own this narrative. Tessa's face lit up. You mean like a social media campaign? Exactly, Nina said. Amelia might have stolen my dish, but she can't steal my story. We're going to show everyone what makes this mine. For the next few hours, Nina poured herself into the dish, every movement purposeful and precise. She roasted peppers and spices, blending them into a mole that was rich and smoky with unexpected hints of citrus. The chicken, traditionally slow-cooked, was replaced with perfectly seared duck breast, its crispy skin glistening. She plated it with artistic flair, using vibrant streaks of sauce and delicate garnishes to create a visual masterpiece. Meanwhile, Tessa worked her magic behind the camera. She snapped photos of Nina chopping, searing, and plating, each image capturing the intensity and creativity of the process. She didn't just photograph the food, she documented the story, the passion in Nina's hands, the determination in her eyes. When the dish was finished, Nina stood back and took a deep breath. It wasn't just food. It was a declaration. This was her journey on a plate, her struggles, her defiance, her independence. Wow, Tessa said softly, lowering her camera. This is stunning. Let's make sure everyone sees it, Nina replied, nodding toward Tessa's laptop. Tessa wasted no time, editing the photos and crafting a post that would grab attention. She wrote, some recipes are inherited. Others are reinvented. This is the story of both. Coming soon to the pop-up event. Within hours, the post was live, and the response was immediate. Comments poured in from local food enthusiasts, praising the creativity and asking where they could taste it. The buzz was electric, and for the first time, Nina felt like she had taken control of the narrative. Amelia, of course, wasn't far behind. She sent Nina a message that night, back down now, or everything comes out, your finances, your family, all of it. Nina showed the message to Hector, her hand surprisingly steady. What do I do? She asked. Hector smiled faintly. You already know the answer. You keep cooking. Nina nodded. She wasn't running anymore, and she wasn't afraid. With Tessa by her side and her own vision finally clear, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about a pop-up event or winning over investors. This was about reclaiming her voice and proving to herself, and the world, that she belonged. The air buzzed with anticipation as Nina Carter stepped into the venue for the pop-up event. The room was filled with rows of perfectly polished tables, their white tablecloths gleaming under the bright overhead lights. Investors mingled with food critics and local media, the hum of their conversations blending with the faint clinking of glasses. It was the kind of crowd Nina had once dreamed of impressing, but tonight, she wasn't here just to impress. She was here to reclaim her story. Nina's station was tucked into a corner, far from the main floor. It was an obvious slight, likely arranged by Amelia Harper. The burners at her station were running unevenly, and several of the ingredients she had ordered were mysteriously missing. Nina clenched her fists, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Panic wouldn't help her now. Hector's words echoed in her mind. When everything goes wrong, that's when you find out what kind of chef you really are. Amelia was working nearby, her station front and center. She caught Nina's eye and smirked, then turned back to her assistants, confidently plating her stolen dish. Nina's heart pounded with frustration, but she forced herself to focus. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let Amelia or anyone else ruin it. Let's make this work, she muttered to herself, surveying her limited ingredients. She adjusted her burners, grabbed what she had, and began creating. The dish she had meticulously planned was no longer an option, but she knew she could improvise. The mole base she had perfected was still in her arsenal, and her hands moved with a confidence born of countless hours in the kitchen. Tessa appeared at her side, her camera slung around her neck. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Barely," Nina admitted, stirring the sauce with a focus that bordered on desperation. "You've got this," Tessa said firmly, snapping photos of Nina at work. "If anyone can pull this off, it's you." Nina nodded, her resolve hardening. She seared the duck to perfection, its golden skin crackling under the heat. With every element she added to the plate, she felt her confidence grow. When she finally stepped back to look at the completed dish, a surge of pride washed over her. It wasn't what she had planned. It was better. It was a dish born from resilience, creativity, and grit. As she carried the plate to the presentation table, she could feel the eyes of the room on her. Amelia stood nearby, watching with a smug expression. Nina placed her dish in front of the investors, her hands steady. "This is my story," she said simply. "Every flavor on this plate represents a part of my journey, breaking free from expectations, embracing risk, and creating something new." The investors leaned in, intrigued. One of them, a tall man in a tailored suit, lifted his fork and took the first bite. His eyebrows shot up as the flavors hit his palate. "This is exceptional," he said, his voice carrying through the room. The other investors quickly followed suit, their murmurs of approval growing louder. Amelia stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's interesting, isn't it?" she said to the investors. "Considering Nina has had financial irregularities, not to mention questionable support from her family." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Nina, who felt her cheeks burn. Before she could speak, Tessa stepped forward, her camera in hand. "Enough," Tessa said, her voice steady. "If anyone's going to talk about Nina's story, it's going to be me." Amelia's smirk faltered as Tessa continued. "Nina's here tonight because she worked for it. Not because someone handed her an opportunity, but because she made one for herself. And as for our family, I can say this as someone who knows firsthand, she's the only one brave enough to follow her dreams." Tessa turned to the investors, her confidence unwavering. "And I'm following mine, too. I'm a photographer, and every image I've taken tonight proves what Nina's been doing, creating something extraordinary." The investors looked impressed, but Amelia wasn't done. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You think a pretty picture can hide the fact that Nina's unstable? Ask her mother. She'll tell you everything." "That's enough, Amelia," came a voice from the back of the room. Nina froze as Angela Carter stepped forward, her expression unreadable. The crowd parted as she approached. For a moment, Angela stood there, her gaze locked on Nina. Then she turned to Amelia. "You're right," Angela said, her voice calm but sharp. "I've made my doubts about Nina very clear. But watching her tonight, I realize I was wrong." Nina blinked in shock as her mother continued. "You've spent more time tearing her down than building anything of your own. That ends now." Amelia's face turned red, and she stormed out, leaving the room in stunned silence. Angela turned back to the investors. "My daughter's talent speaks for itself," she said firmly. "If you're smart, you'll invest in her." Nina stared at her mother, unable to process what had just happened. Tessa leaned over and whispered, "Looks like she finally got it." The lead investor stood, extending his hand to Nina. "We'd like to discuss your future, Miss Carter," he said with a smile. Nina shook his hand, her head spinning. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. As the crowd dispersed, Tessa wrapped an arm around Nina. "You did it," she said softly. "No," Nina replied, glancing at her mother, who stood quietly in the corner. "We did it." The pop-up event had officially ended, but Nina Carter's heart was still racing as she stood near her station, her apron smudged and her hands trembling with exhaustion. The investors were gathered at a table, murmuring among themselves. Their glances toward her were no longer skeptical but curious, almost impressed. It was a moment she had fought tooth and nail to reach, but the uncertainty still gnawed at her. The lead investor, A tall woman with sharp eyes and a firm handshake stepped forward, extending her hand. "Nina," she said, her tone decisive, "what you've done tonight isn't just about the food. It's about innovation, resilience, and authenticity. Those are qualities we want to invest in." Nina's breath hitched as the weight of her words sank in. She had done it. Despite Amelia's sabotage, her mother's interference, and the countless obstacles she'd faced, she had proven herself. "Thank you," Nina said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just my dream. It's my life's work. I promise you won't regret this." The investor nodded, her smile genuine. "We'll be in touch soon to discuss the details. But for now, congratulations. Tonight was your victory." As the investors moved away, Nina felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw her father, Robert Carter, standing a few feet away. His hands were tucked awkwardly into his pockets, and for the first time in years, his expression wasn't distant or dismissive. It was soft, almost unsure.
Dad.
Nina asked, her voice tinged with both surprise and caution. Robert stepped closer, his eyes flicking to the station where she had spent the last several hours creating something extraordinary. "I saw what you did tonight," he said quietly. "And he hesitated, then sighed. "I need to apologize, Nina. I've been wrong about you." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes, his voice filled with a sincerity she hadn't heard before. "I thought I was doing the right thing by supporting what I thought was practical, safe. But watching you tonight, seeing how much passion and talent you have, I realize I've been blind to what really matters." Nina's throat tightened as tears threatened to spill. "You mean that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Robert said, his voice firm. "You've earned this, Nina. And I'm proud of you. If there's anything I can do to help financially or otherwise, you just say the word." She nodded, her emotions too raw to speak. But the smile that broke across her face said more than words ever could. Not far away, Angela Carter stood quietly, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. She approached hesitantly, her gaze flicking between her husband and daughter. Nina braced herself for the usual criticism, but Angela surprised her. "I didn't want to believe you could succeed like this," Angela admitted, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I thought if you didn't do things the way we planned, you'd fail. But tonight, you proved me wrong." Nina stared at her mother, searching for any hint of condescension or judgment, but found none. "Mom, are you saying you're proud of me?" she asked cautiously. Angela hesitated, then nodded. "I'm saying I see you differently now, and I'm willing to try to understand this dream of yours." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was more than Nina had ever expected. And in that moment, it was enough. Tessa joined them, her camera slung over her shoulder and a beaming smile on her face. "Well, this is a sight I never thought I'd see," she teased, wrapping an arm around Nina. "The Carters, finally on the same page." Angela shot her a look, but said nothing. Instead, she placed a hand lightly on Nina's shoulder. "Your father's right," she said softly. "You've earned this." As the family stood together, the investors and other chefs filing out around them, Nina felt something shift. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. For the first time, her parents were seeing her not as a disappointment, but as a chef, someone with talent, ambition, and a future worth believing in. Later that night, as Nina and Tessa packed up her station, Tessa grinned and held up her phone. "By the way," she said, "our post went viral." The investors weren't the only ones impressed tonight. Nina laughed, the sound light and free. "What do you mean?" Tessa showed her the screen. Comments and shares poured in from local foodies and culinary enthusiasts, all praising Nina's creativity and determination. Some even mentioned Amelia's earlier antics, calling out her plagiarism in favor of Nina's authenticity. "Well," Nina said with a wry smile, "I guess that's one way to win." Tessa slung an arm around her shoulder as they walked toward the exit. "You didn't just win tonight," she said. "You set the table for the future, and I can't wait to see what you serve next." Nina smiled, her heart full for the first time in years. The journey wasn't over, but she was finally walking it on her terms, and she wasn't walking it alone. 6 months after the pop-up event, Nina Carter stood at the entrance of her new restaurant, taking in a scene that had once existed only in her dreams. The dining room was buzzing with energy, tables filled with guests savoring her signature dishes, servers weaving expertly between them, and the open kitchen humming with the controlled chaos that was the heartbeat of her operation. The neon sign above the entrance read Sabor Nuevo, a name chosen to reflect her fusion of bold tradition and inventive modernity. The walls of the restaurant told a story as vivid as the food on the plates. Framed photographs lined every corner, each one capturing the essence of Nina's culinary creations: vibrant mole sauces, intricately plated entrees, and the textures of hand-rolled tortillas. Tessa's work. Her sister's talent had become an integral part of Sabor Nuevo's identity, giving the restaurant not just an artistic edge, but a deeply personal one. Nina stood behind the pass, watching as plates went out to the dining room, each one a testament to the journey that had brought her here. Her father and mother sat at their usual table, a quiet pride in their expressions as they shared a plate of Nina's reimagined mole duck. It was still surreal, seeing them here, not as critics but as her greatest supporters. "Nina," Tessa called from across the room, camera in hand. She waved her over, grinning. "You have to see the shot. The way the light hits the duck, it's perfect." Nina laughed, shaking her head as she walked over. "Tessa, do you ever stop working?" "Not when the work is this good," Tessa quipped, showing her the image on the camera screen. It was stunning, a perfect encapsulation of the dish's artistry. "Okay, you're right," Nina admitted, smiling. "It's perfect. Let me know when you're ready to update the gallery wall." Tessa slung an arm around her sister's shoulder. "We're making a pretty great team, huh?" Nina nodded, the warmth in her chest growing. "We always did," she said softly. "It just took us a while to figure it out." As they stood together, a knock at the kitchen door drew Nina's attention. She walked over, opening it to find a familiar face she hadn't expected to see: Amelia Harper. Her former rival looked different now. Her designer chef's coat had been replaced with a plain black jacket, and her confident smirk was gone, replaced by a hesitant expression that Nina almost didn't recognize. "Amelia," Nina said, her voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" Amelia shifted uncomfortably, holding a folder in her hands. "I heard about the restaurant," she began, "and I wanted to say congratulations." "It's impressive." Nina raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. Amelia sighed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I lost my place," she admitted. "After everything that happened at the pop-up event, the investors pulled out. I tried to keep it going, but it wasn't enough." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nina felt a flicker of pity for the woman who had once gone to such lengths to sabotage her. But she also remembered the lessons she had learned in Hector's kitchen. Anger can destroy, or it can build something better. "What do you want, Amelia?" Nina asked, keeping her tone even. Amelia hesitated, then met Nina's eyes. "I need a job," she said simply. "I know I don't deserve it after what I did, but I'm asking anyway. I can help. I've learned a lot, and I'm willing to start at the bottom." Nina studied her for a moment, considering. Then she stepped aside, gesturing for Amelia to come in. "We're always looking for talent," she said. "But there's one condition." "Anything," Amelia said quickly. Nina's gaze was steady. "You bring your own recipes this time. If you're going to work here, you need to stand on your own." Amelia nodded, her face a mix of relief and humility. "I can do that," she said softly. "Good," Nina said, leading her to the kitchen. "Be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow. And don't be late." Amelia smiled faintly, and for the first time, Nina felt like this might be a new beginning for both of them. Later that evening, as the dinner rush slowed and the final plates went out, Nina leaned against the counter, watching the restaurant wind down. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, a symphony of success that she had built with her own hands. Her mother appeared at the kitchen door, wiping her hands on a napkin. "The duck was incredible," Angela said, her voice filled with a warmth Nina wasn't used to hearing. "Thanks, Mom," Nina replied, surprised but grateful. Angela lingered for a moment. You know, she said quietly, I never imagined you'd end up here. But I'm glad you did. Nina nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. Me too. As her parents left and the last guests trickled out, Tessa joined her at the counter, a mischievous grin on her face. So, what's next, chef? Nina thought for a moment, then smiled. Whatever it is, we'll do it together. The two sisters clinked glasses of sparkling water, their bond stronger than ever, as Sabor Nuevo hummed around them, a place not just of food but of family, resilience, and redemption. For Nina, the journey wasn't just about building a restaurant. It was about building a legacy, one plate, one story, and one connection at a time.